What German guards said when Patton's tanks smashed the POW camp gates. The fog had been sitting on the camp all morning, thick and wet, clinging to the barbed wire like a living thing. It muted sound, swallowed distance, and made the world feel smaller than it was. Inside the prisoner of war camp, men wrapped in threadbare coats shuffled in slow circles to keep blood moving through numb feet. They had learned to measure time by hunger and cold rather than clocks. Somewhere beyond the wire, the war was moving, but here it felt frozen, suspended between yesterday and a tomorrow no one dared to imagine. On the outer perimeter, Oberstfreiter Karl Weiss tightened his scarf and stamped his boots. He had been a factory worker in Essen before the war, a man who fixed machines and went home at night to soup and bread. Now he carried a rifle that felt heavier every day and watched over enemies who no longer looked like enemies at all. They were thin, hollow-eyed, moving shadows. He had stopped counting them weeks ago. Counting led to thinking, and thinking led to questions that made his stomach hurt. "You hear that?" muttered Franz Keller, another guard, leaning against a watchtower post. Franz had been a butcher's son, broad-shouldered once, now sagging with exhaustion. He cocked his head, listening. Karl shook his head. "Just the wind." "No," Franz said, "that's not wind." They both stood still. At first it was only a vibration, so faint Karl wondered if it was his imagination or the lingering echo of artillery he'd heard in dreams. Then it came again, a low, steady rumble that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Somewhere beyond the fog, engines were moving. Franz swallowed. "Those aren't trucks." Karl felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He had heard tanks before, in Russia, years ago. He remembered the way the earth seemed to complain under their weight, the way sound came before sight, warning you that something unstoppable was approaching. An officer appeared, boots crunching on frozen gravel. Lieutenant Becker was young, too young, his uniform neat in a way that suggested fear rather than discipline. "Positions," he snapped. "Probably reconnaissance." "Sir," Franz said, voice low, "there's more than one." Becker hesitated, then waved them quiet. The rumble grew louder, resolving into a deep, rhythmic thunder. From inside the camp, prisoners had stopped moving. Faces turned toward the sound, eyes wide, afraid to hope. Hope had been dangerous for too long. Karl climbed a few steps up the watchtower ladder, squinting into the fog. Shapes began to emerge, dark and angular, growing larger with terrifying speed. The fog peeled back as if pushed aside by their presence. Tanks. American tanks. They rolled forward in a broad line, steel beasts with white stars painted boldly on their hulls. Mud and ice flew from their tracks. The ground shook so hard Karl felt it in his teeth. "My God," Franz whispered. "It's Patton." The name moved along the guard line like a shock. Even those who pretended bravery had heard the stories. The general who never stopped. The man whose tanks appeared where they should not be, moving faster than maps allowed. The one who broke rules by breaking through. Lieutenant Becker's face went pale. "Hold fire," he said, too quickly. "Wait for orders." "Orders from who?" Franz asked. "Berlin." A tank's main gun swung slightly, not aiming yet, but aware. Its engine roared, confident, impatient. The lead tank did not slow as it reached the outer fence. Barbed wire snapped and twisted like straw. Posts flew aside. The camp's first line of defense vanished beneath steel. Inside the wire, a prisoner cried out. Then another. A sound rose that Karl had never heard before, not quite a cheer, not quite a sob, something raw and animal. Men pressed toward the fence, ignoring shouted orders from guards who suddenly sounded very small. Becker raised his pistol, hand shaking. "Back," he yelled at the prisoners. "Back, or I'll shoot." Karl looked at the pistol, then at the tanks, then at the prisoners' faces. He thought of his wife, of the letters that had stopped coming months ago. He thought of the factory floor, of oil-stained hands building something useful instead of guarding men who were already half dead. The tanks did not stop. The main gate loomed ahead, iron bars welded thick and high. For years it had been the symbol of the camp's permanence. It stood between captivity and freedom, between the world and this forgotten place. The lead tank accelerated. "Jesus Christ," Franz said softly. "They're not even slowing down." The impact was thunderous. Metal screamed as the gate buckled inward, hinges tearing free. The sound echoed across the camp, sharp and final, like a verdict. The gate collapsed, twisted and broken, crushed under the tank's weight. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then chaos. American infantry poured in behind the tanks, rifles ready but muzzles low. They shouted orders in English, voices urgent but controlled. Medics ran past, eyes already searching for the worst cases. A jeep skidded to a halt near the gate, and a man with a pearl-handled revolver stood up, scanning the camp with fierce intensity. Even Carl knew that stance, that posture from photographs. George S. Patton himself. Franz laughed, a short, hysterical sound. So that's him, he said. He looks angry. Patton's voice carried, sharp as a whip. Secure the perimeter. Get those men medical attention now. Prisoners surged forward, some falling to their knees, others reaching out to touch the tanks as if to make sure they were real. One man kissed the muddy steel track and wept openly. Lieutenant Becker lowered his pistol. It clattered to the ground. He stared at the Americans, then at his own men. It's over, he said, more to himself than anyone else. An American soldier approached the guards, weapon raised but finger off the trigger. Drop your rifles, he said, clear and calm. Hands where I can see 'em. Carl didn't hesitate. He let his rifle slide from his numb fingers. Franz did the same. Around them, other guards followed suit. No one argued. No one resisted. The war, at least here, had ended in the space of a single, violent minute. As they were herded to one side, Franz leaned close to Carl. What do you think they'll do to us? Carl watched a medic wrap a blanket around a skeletal prisoner, watched Patton stride past without looking at them. I don't know, he said. But whatever it is, it can't be worse than staying here. Nearby, an older guard muttered, half in awe, half in bitterness, the devil himself could not stop those tanks. Another shook his head slowly. We were guarding ghosts, he said. And now the living have come back. Carl said nothing. He felt hollow, emptied out by the noise and the suddenness of it all. But beneath that emptiness was something like relief. The tanks had smashed more than gates. They had smashed the lie that this camp, this duty, this war would go on forever. As American soldiers moved through the camp, cutting wire, opening barracks, the prisoners' voices rose again, stronger now. Some laughed, some cried, some simply stood, stunned, as if afraid to move lest the moment vanish. Patton paused near the gate, looking at the wreckage. He said something to an aide, his expression hard but satisfied. Then he turned and walked into the camp, boots crunching on broken iron. Franz watched him go. When people ask, he said quietly, what will you say about today? Carl thought for a long moment. He thought of the sound of the engines, the way the fog had parted, the certainty in that forward motion. I'll say, he replied, that when Patton's tanks came through the gates, we knew the war had finally found us. And it did not ask permission. The fog began to lift as the sun pushed weakly through the clouds. Light touched the camp for the first time in days, glinting off shattered metal and muddy tracks. The gates lay broken, useless, behind them. And for the men who had waited so long, freedom rolled in on steel treads, unstoppable, undeniable, and loud enough to be heard even through the thickest fog.